Tribal police receive their authority from a variety of sources: the governing body of the tribe, state statutes, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
First, it depends on whether or not they've entered into what's known as a 638 contract with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where they can then, they choose to have their own police department, they choose to have their own jails, their own dispatch, their own fire EMS agency, so to speak, rather than having the BIA or the federal agencies come in and have that for them. They choose to do it on their own. So if they have that 638 contract, then of course they receive, tribal officers receive their authority under tribal laws, so they're a tribally sworn officer. Then there's normally caveats in there that say, in order to be a tribal police officer for us, you have to be Arizona Post certified. So they receive their authority from Arizona Post and being Arizona certified peace officer.
Another way that tribal law enforcement will get federal authority is through the BIA SLEC commissioning process. So the special law enforcement certification that the Department of Interior provides allows tribal law enforcement, if they meet certain criteria and have a memorandum of understanding with or agreement with the BIA, to go through certain training and become specially commissioned so that they are treated like a federal officer for all purposes, so long as they're acting within the scope of their federal authority.
The tribal police receive their authority from the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Department of Interior. And it's through them, and the tribe administers the police departments.
Sometimes tribal law enforcement, just like state law enforcement, can obtain cross-deputization to investigate crimes that occur off of the reservation. And the same is true for state officers who want to obtain tribal authority to operate on the reservation.
Normally, to be a tribally sworn officer, again, it depends on the individual tribal nation. You know, some tribal nations, it's you just walk in, you see the tribal judge or the tribal chairperson or governor, president, whatever their title may be, and you get sworn in. You know, other places there may be formal training that they have to go through.
We receive what's called a special law enforcement card, and it's basically a commission card. And all officers have to take a test. They have to go through a course in order to receive the card. And basically, it's just a commission card for tribal officers.
BIA law enforcement, Bureau of Indian Affairs, the U.S. Department of Interior, they still have oversight over tribes across the country.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, was established in 1824 and is the oldest bureau of the United States Department of the Interior. They are special agents with the federal government and must complete their certification. Their certification process is similar to our state certification process.
The mission of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services is to provide, first of all, justice services to many of our tribal communities out there, then also to provide training and technical assistance to our tribal partners, and to protect and promote the sovereignty of our tribal nations.
They have a concurrent federal jurisdiction, kind of like the FBI would. And so that also plays into the reservation and whether or not the Bureau of Indian Affairs is on that particular reservation or not. So you'd have the tribal officers that are AZ Post certified. You'd also have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is the federal component of that on the reservation.
There are some agencies that still have officers who are certified through the Bureau of Indian Affairs Indian Police Academy, which currently is based over in Artesia, New Mexico. Those officers, unless they have passed an equivalency process through Arizona Post, would only have authority to enforce tribal laws and federal laws.
Ultimately, the certification process is BIA officers go through an academy just like Arizona peace officers do. It's just BIA officers go through the federal academy versus Arizona peace officers go through the Arizona academy.
Our goal ultimately would be to get everybody federally certified, because quite honestly, you know, every additional officer I've got that's got federal certification is just one more resource I can rely upon. And if they don't have that certification, not only might I not be able to use them as an affiant in a search warrant or a complaint, but more importantly, if they get assaulted in the line of their duty, they're not working as a federal officer unless they've got that certification at the time. And so it's not assault on a federal law enforcement if someone were to assault them. So I think it's important that we be able to protect those officers and that we can charge those cases when they get assaulted. So federal certification is a great thing for us.
Tribally operated law enforcement agencies provide a broad range of public safety services, just like non-tribal agencies do. But there are some differences between the two entities.
The difference in policing in any country is our communities are very unique and they're very diverse. It's made up of, even in their names, of rancherias, bands, pueblos, villages, and tribes. It's a very personal and relationship-based policing, which is a little bit different from policing in other communities. We are dealing with people that we know and we've probably grown up with, and so we are sensitive to not only the cultural and the traditional aspects of it, but also in the relationship and the relational aspects of involvement in the community between us and the community.
Working for any tribal entity or reservation that, in some of the remote areas in the nations like Navajo, the Teal Nation, or Hualapai, your backup resources are very limited. Your backup could be anywhere from 30 to 40 miles. And as an officer, in those areas, your safety awareness has to be, higher on the scale.
The challenges with working in a more rural environment are the services that can be provided to the community at large. With the larger urban environments, there's more services that are provided by different agencies, social services and stuff. Well, with urban environment, you have less of those services that are available for you to utilize to help your customers out.
When you become a law enforcement officer for an Indian tribe, you have to know the culture and the traditional aspects of the tribe that you're going to be working for.
They call this area the Indian Village. It's the representative of the people that either are in this area or have come through this area, and that's what this all is. Of course, you know what the teepees are from the Plains Indians, and you've got the Navajo Hogans and their dwellings, the male and the female. Then you've got what the Hualapai built, and as the Pies, I guess you could call them, the Wickiups and whatnot on that side.
There's a big difference between tribal law and state law. Tribal law falls automatically if it's severe, if it goes federally. There are some things that in the state that go federally, but you're dealing more with federal laws at tribal.
A lot of the tourist destinations fall within Indian country. If you look up north, you've got, Monument Valley and some of those that are on the Navajo Nation reservation. You've got Grand Canyon West, which is up in Hualapai, up in northwest Arizona. So not only do you have to work with the locals and learn the local customs and cultures and how that plays into law enforcement, but then you're dealing with individuals from all different walks of life.
With the size of the reservation, we have over 1 million acres that we enforce law on, and that's somewhere right around 1,500 square miles. And with the 2 substations, there's only really one main road that's on the reservation that we can travel from one side to the other side, and it's extremely rough, extremely rural.
Many of the communities that we service are 200-300 miles away from a lot of other major metropolitan areas, and that can be difficult from a law enforcement standpoint because, for example, the patrol officers, they might just have 1 or 2 patrol officers that have a beat that covers up to 100 square miles. That's a lot of area for one person. The FBI's role in that is somewhat difficult because for us, first of all, we're faced with manpower issues, and then on top of that, we are required to drive several hundred miles maybe to go to a crime scene. So we have a timing issue that takes place a lot of times getting out to some of these remote areas.
I think the tribal officer is a lot more challenging because you get to deal with not only tribal members, or not just from that reservation, but you deal with other tribal members from other reservations, all right? You deal with non-natives too, that are that are not within that jurisdiction. So you got a mix of everything.
The first thing they need to decide is the person that they've contacted, are they a tribal member? And not necessarily just for that specific tribe. Are they a tribal member in the country? If they are not, then it's standard business. You know, if it's a non-tribal member, you just utilize state law, you issue your citation, make your arrest, whatever you need to do. If it is a tribal member, we need to look at if the trooper is cross-commissioned so that they can enforce tribal law. If they cannot, either it's something where they would simply have to let it go if it may be a simple civil violation. If it's another a violation that needs to be taken enforcement action on, we would ask for assistance from the tribal police department.
When you work in native land, even if it's a large reservation, you get to know the people in your community. You know the few that are the problem children. The majority are really good people. And they start feeling like family.
The familiarization, I think, makes the policing in our community a little easier in the fact that we are able to de-escalate situations sometimes a lot quicker than in a traditional approach to which would be with a stranger. It doesn't necessarily mean that we compromise any of the officer safety aspects of it, but it does make it more personal in nature, and sometimes that is a definite added bonus or a positive tribute to policing in any country.
Along with the limited resources comes a lack of resources for certain investigative tools. For instance, forensic interviews for children who have been sexually abused, autopsies for people who have been killed, expert reviews or investigations in, say, vehicular manslaughter cases and that sort of thing. So sometimes that limited funding that they're dealing with makes it difficult for them, and it's very challenging for them to overcome, I think, some of those hurdles with those limited resources.
The crimes of violence that we all share, from the homicides to the domestic violence to the aggravated assaults, those type of things that cause serious bodily injuries, doesn't matter whose law it is and how it's written, we're all enforcing the same statutes by word. Because if you look at all of them, even the federal government statutes, they're all similar in wording. It's picking out those elements that you're going to find that are the same. Where it becomes different is where you start talking about liquor law violations and some other, type of issues that you may not see in another community, town, or jurisdiction.
Non-tribal officers working on or near tribal lands need to understand that they don't have authority to take criminal action on Native Americans on Indian country. Unless there is some type of an intergovernmental agreement, mutual aid agreement, cross-commission, or deputization between that municipal, county, or state agency and the specific tribe that they're working next to. They do have the ability to be involved in hot pursuits. If they pursue someone, however, there may be an extradition procedure involved through the tribal courts if the person ultimately is stopped on Indian country and is Native American.
A lot of times there's no service where they can actually talk to the people to find out what's going on.
Another thing is when you're dealing with Indian culture and you're working for a tribe, you've got to know the history. You've got to know some type of why the tribe evolved the way it did and why it is there on that reservation. So history is important. You have to be aware of the economics in the community. And you also have to be aware of the geography. You have to know landmarks. You have to know, because it's not an everyday, it's not a city. There are some tribes that are located within city limits, but most of the tribes in Arizona are desert area. And so if you're responding to a call, you have to be aware of the geography.
The positive side is that with a smaller agency, obviously it's going to be a smaller community. You get to talk to people a little more and get familiar with them versus a bigger place, you'll probably never see that person again.
The differences between, like taking the Navajo Nation, for example, and the Wallapai Nation. The biggest differences here is obviously the size. Size is the biggest difference. The crimes are no different. There are no difference in the crimes. What makes the difference in between the two different tribes is simply this: we have a lot more time to employ what we've been trained to do, what we've gathered our knowledge, skills, and abilities in, and apply it to the crime that we're investigating or the incident we're investigating and the service that we're providing. We have more time to stop and talk to you and answer your questions about whatever it is you have on your mind.
Where I first started working over in Mojave County, it was a checkerboard system. So every mile it was either reservation or state land. And so we worked very closely with Fort Mojave Tribe over there and their law enforcement. You know, if you make a traffic stop, a lot of the tribal members know if I keep rolling for, another quarter mile, I'm going to be back on to tribal land. But the relationship we had with the tribal agency at the field level made it very smooth. Contact them, they'd be there, they would take disposition of it and make it smooth.
My experience is that there are more things in common between Indian country law enforcement and municipal, county, and state law enforcement agencies than really we have differences. Certainly there are some differences, but to talk about the commonalities, we attend the same police academies, we receive much of the same training, sometimes it's shared training. Many times we operate on the same radio frequencies, we handle the same types of social issues and criminal issues. We sometimes even share criminals. So there are a lot of things in common. A lot of the same equipment. Yuma County, for example, they have interoperability with among the tribes and the municipalities and the county agencies there.
A police officer is a police officer. As long as you know the proper jurisdiction from your court, it would be the same as trying something into, city municipal code, as opposed to state law, as opposed to a county ordinance. The same general thing applies. Knowing your jurisdictions, what law applies to who. But as far as physically doing the job, it's all pretty much the same.
I don't think there's a lot of difference between Indian country law enforcement and other law enforcement agencies. Obviously, Indian country communities, just like other communities, law enforcement's going to vary depending upon the size of the community, the resources that they have, what the nature of the issues are they're dealing with. They still suffer from the same challenges that every law enforcement agency suffers from in terms of, there isn't enough money to pay them what they deserve, and there isn't enough resources to go around.
There's no difference in the riot that goes on back east and then, something that goes on like in the Navajo Nation. And pretty much you're seeing the same thing, but you're just dealing with a different, a different color and people. Indian people are no different than the people back east. They act the same, and we do pretty much everything that every law enforcement agency does anywhere, and there is no difference.
Law enforcement in Indian country function within a complicated jurisdictional net, answer to multiple authorities, operate with limited resources, and patrol some of the most desolate of territory, often without assistance from partner law enforcement agencies. But the importance and role of policing to address public safety concerns on the reservation has evolved significantly over the past decade.
Things have changed quite a bit. In the old days, it used to be that it was pretty clearly defined what were tribal crimes and what were federal crimes and what were state crimes. It's not as clear-cut anymore. With the advent of the Violence Against Women's Act and the Tribal Law and Order Act, now tribes have been given at least the possibility of expanding their jurisdiction over crimes that in the past would have been exclusively federal.
We've evolved from just enforcers to educators. I see a big change in how we handle things since I first started 30 plus years ago. Now we're not behind the 8 ball all the time. We're trying to get ahead of it. We deal with the children, we deal with the elders. We spend time going out and doing community events.
We like to have the same status as any other law enforcement agency in the country. We are so fortunate in Arizona that not a lot of tribes and not a lot of tribal law enforcement agencies across the country have this, but in Arizona, we're really far ahead because of the state statute that gives us authority to enforce Arizona traffic laws and also Arizona criminal laws too as well. So it really makes it easier for us, especially here on the Navajo Nation, being we lack resources. There's only a few state officers and county officers that are available to us here, so we're doing it ourselves.
In the city limits, you have probably, 6 to 7 officers per beat in a city. But on the reservation, you can have, 2 officers for the whole shift. So it's not safe for the officers, which can bring morale issues, which can lead to them quitting.
I think the demands for the tribal law enforcement have gone up. You look at the number of calls and you just, when we have face-to-face encounters with these different officers and you talk about the number of communities they're covering by themselves or the number of miles they're covering by themselves, it is very high. I think the overall expectation from the public, from the services they should be getting from their law enforcement, have probably gone up greatly in the past 15, 20 years, and I know that these tribal agencies are struggling to keep up. They've got economic issues, they have growth issues, getting people through the door, meeting the standards, et cetera, just like all of the agencies do, and yet they have a huge amount of territory to cover, and trying to meet the expectation and the needs of their community are there.
First of all, you look at the tribe, and culturally you look at those who were called upon, asked to do, or were given the responsibility of protecting the tribe, okay? In the Navajo way, when you look at that, the principle is called the Bahadene, and when you look at that, it's the warrior's role in providing protection. So you're a peacekeeper, a provider, and a protector.
Not only are they the providers, protectors, and peacekeepers for the individual tribal nation they work for, but they're that gateway between those visitors and those non-tribal members that come to work and recreate and visit those tribal lands.
We have better resources, better communication. I think just law enforcement in general has evolved into a better service within Indian country. Some of the things that I've seen change is more of a community impact, community initiatives. I see those being a little bit more involvement now than they used to be. We deal with a lot of child sexual abuse cases, and I think over the years we have been able to, I've seen that part of law enforcement really evolve to where we have a lot of pieces in place now in order to investigate those cases.
There are some areas that are so remote on reservations that communications are very much limited. Often tribal agencies are very short-handed, and that's not always the case, but when it is, there are long times and long distances between any assistance arriving at the request of an officer.
If you didn't have any police officers, this place would be wild. I mean, I started out in 2002, and it's like the document that we used to use back in Navajo, where the roads end, the Wild West began. Pretty much, it is to get the cowboys. And if you don't have any law enforcement, it tends to get out of hand. And since then, it's calmed down a lot.
We are expected to walk amongst our people. And in walking amongst our people, that means we're with them. We're not separated from them. We're not above them. We're not below them. And we're not out here. We're with them. You're part of the community. You're providing for the community, but you're also taking care of the community in whatever way. Whether it be getting the kids to school or delivering the babies, when there's nobody else there, to helping bury those who have passed on.
When it comes to me, I work with the school, so I do a lot of house visits. The style is no different from any other department, Just interacting with the community, let them know that you're there for them. The more interactive you are with the community, the better results you're going to have in the long run.
BI's role today in law enforcement has greatly improved in the partnerships, I would say. Are developing it with more of our stakeholders, with more of our agreements, sharing of the authority, sharing of training, and sharing of resources has really provided a more of almost a lockstep approach with our tribal partners. We are able to provide and share resources and training, which for our officers in our departments is absolutely critical. So that creates a partnership, plus the communication that we have in joint training, not only in the local training, but also through basic training, advanced training, and specialized training, where they are constantly attending training or going or working together also.
The same criminal activities that you find here that you find in border towns, or you find at big cities. You know, because you go to training and everybody talks. Hey, yeah, we had this going on. Hey, we had that going on like 3 years ago. You know, we had the same activity, same thing going on. They're like the riot back east. We had riots in Navajo. We had riots here. You know, it's no difference. I says we deal with the same people, but it's our people that we deal with.
This concludes Unit 6 of this training. Upon completing the Unit 6 assessment module, we will take a look at relationships between tribal police and other law enforcement agencies. We'll examine trending crimes and the changing economic landscape in Indian country and how they affect law enforcement. You will now be automatically redirected to the Unit 6 assessment module.